Woohoo! Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, episode number 86, Learning React.js. And today on our panel we have Danny Blue,
Hey, everybody.
myself, Eric Isaacson, and our guest today is Amy Knight.
Hello.
Hey, Amy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am most frequently known as this girl that went from figure skating to programming a few years ago. I started out, I was working for a company called SparkPost, and I was doing a lot of Node, a lot of Angular, and most recently I switched to a new company, and I am in the process of learning React there. Still doing Node, but also learning React.
So
Nice.
can we just stop there before we get into some of the React stuff? How did you get from figure skating to programming? So how did that happen? Those are two different things.
Yeah, very different. When I graduated college, I was doing some coaching, and the plan was for me to coach the rest of my life. I really enjoyed coaching, but I married my husband. We moved away from a skating rink, and kind of started this career in marketing because in college, that was just the plan, just skate and coach. And so, it was like, get that degree. I was fortunate enough to have an academic scholarship. I had to have really high grades, though, so I was kind of intimidated to take really hard courses. And so just kind of got that piece of paper. And a little while into marriage, my husband was serving in the military, and it's very hard for a military spouse to have a successful career. And just kind of coming from my skating days, I realized that having something that I am passionate about, that's my personality thrives on that, and I wasn't happy. So I toyed around with some things. I actually did physical therapy school for a year, and I think that opened my eyes to more of math and science. But I got to the patient care part, and I wasn't so crazy about that. So I kind of went back to the drawing board, and from being in a lot of marketing, I was around a lot of developers, and at one point we had this expression engine site, and the company had moved, and the address was outdated, phone numbers outdated, and I was doing project management / marketing. Just got kind of tired of asking the developers hey, can you just go in there and make this tiny change, please? And so I went home one night and I'm gonna figure this out myself, and I did, and that's kind of how it all started. My husband was actually deployed at the time, so I had a year to myself with nothing else to do. And rather than go out and hang out with the other Army wives, I was I'm gonna do something cool here. I'm gonna do something cool with my time. And so I started doing more and more, and I just fell in love. Went to a boot camp, and after that, got a job, and so I've been working professionally for a year and 9 months or so.
That's awesome. I'm always really interested to hear because I didn't come from a computer. Because there are some people that go to standard, go to school for computers, get a job right after. So I'm always interested when people come into world or the web development through different ways. Well, maybe the main reason I wanted to you on is to talk about your experience starting to learn React. So in case any of our listeners have been living under a rock, can you just tell us really quick what React is?
Yep. So React, just React itself, a lot of people say React, and I think what they really mean is the React ecosystem. But React itself is just the view portion of your front end, and so that's really all React is. There's the React ecosystem, which includes Flux, Redux, all kinds of. There's a lot of ES6, and there's people using Webpack, so there's all that stuff to go along with it. And so when I came on the podcast, I thought, I have not been doing this very long. I'm not going to claim to be some React expert, but being that I'm a newer developer, I have a lot of friends and people who are hey, how in the world did you get started? What do you do? There's a million things to learn. So I'd love to kind of just talk about how I chose to start learning this and kind of like where I'm at, what I've been doing.
Yeah, the React ecosystem is pretty intimidating, especially if you haven't really worked in JavaScript ecosystem in general, right? I mean, Node is pretty impressive with the vast amounts of things that you have for that. And then you look at the Angular community, which has grown substantially in the past couple of years. And I know you've been part of that community as well for a while now. So, I mean, can you tell us what it's like coming in, and having, because it seems like you're doing so much at once. Like, what is it like coming from this Angular world, or even JavaScript in general, into this React world?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting. I do another podcast, JavaScript Jabber, and so part of that, I'm always like every week kind of like, at a very, very basic level, digging into all these new concepts. And so, so I started kind of toying around with React a little bit in the summer, and then over Christmas break, I was like, I kind of want to learn this. And so that was one thing like I put in the show notes. I think, so like the first question people ask, like, should I learn React? Should I learn Angular? Should I learn Angular 2? And I'm going to say, which, Eric and I were kind of talking about before the show, what I've been up to right now, like, don't learn it just because it's cool. I should rephrase that. Don't just learn React or any of these tools because you feel like pressured to learn them. Like, oh, I have to learn them or I'm not a web developer. I would say no. Like, learn them because you are excited to learn them, and learn them because maybe you think what you're working with might have some issues, and maybe you think React might solve them. I will say there are great parts of Angular or bad parts of Angular. There are great parts of React, and some people might hate me for saying this, but I think with React you could also do some bad things. So it's, to me, more about like how you're using the tool than the tool itself. Anyways, so.
No, that's great. That's great advice too. It's like I know a lot of people that I've talked to have the same reaction. Like, which should I learn first? And I mean, it's hard. It's hard to really say because they're all pretty much. I mean, to me, maybe I'll probably get yelled at for this saying, Angular, React, Ember, they're all really good. They just, sometimes for your use case, some excel better than others. But like learning this stuff, you'll have different gotchas and different things that happen in them. I'm just starting to learn React 2 here, looking through some of the code bases at Carfax, and it's really interesting stuff. But I'm just getting started, so I'm even a little bit more behind on this.
So I'll say this. Here's the problem that I had experienced that made me kind of want to explore this. So as a backup, a year and a half when I started my new job, and I was also working with some other junior developers there, and we would have these Angular controllers, and you're a newer developer, you're so focused on like, I just want to get this to work, but you're not, especially like you're straight out of boot camp and you haven't learned like best practices, and like, I'm just going to put this on scope and this on scope, and I'm going to update it here and update it there, and like, oh my gosh, it works, and I'm going to put it in review. That then you're like, but how does it work? Because you've like put all this stuff on scope, and like, oh, I clicked over here and now this broke something over there, and like, but that's, I don't think that's necessarily so much Angular's fault. Like, you can do great things in Angular if you're careful about what you're doing. So when I was doing Angular, like, I started kind of toy with like these more like functional concepts and not doing that kind of stuff on scope. And so it made me really, really interested in trying to learn React. So.
Yeah, it took us a while to get there in the Angular community, right? And we had people like John Papa. He had he still has it, the style guide, right? And so that's fantastic. Like, now we have a community-driven way to kind of build these applications. I saw a few talks prior to that even where we're modularizing things and making it so that you could put Angular features for Angular that could go across multiple applications. And it's interesting, the modularity, and I think React kind of seems to excel at this, at least from the small prototype playthings I've worked with. because it componentizes things as well. Would you say that that's been your experience?
Yeah, and like back to the Angular days, like there are some great things in there, like to prototype something or to get newer developers situated on a project. Like I still would be a fan of using Angular for a lot of those reasons. As far as React goes, though, like as I got a little bit further along in my first job, I started to be a little bit more interested in like how can I make the code that I'm writing read better? How can I, make my code more maintainable? How can I write less code? Stuff like that. So that's when like kind of wanting to learn more of these like functional concepts and wanting to learn more of React, which like the big functional concept there, like composition, like React is just like, which is a functional concept, is like composition of all these components. Which if I understand too, like I haven't done much with Angular 2, so but I understand it's like very similar. So.
Yeah, and you're working now at a new place since last I spoke with you, and I think you're working with Jameson Dance, right, from
Yep.
JSJ as well.
Yep.
Which is pretty cool. He runs. For those of you who don't know, he's one of the co-organizers of React Rally over in Utah, which is a pretty big React conference. I think there's still tickets on sale. I'm not sure.
I think so.
But it's interesting. Like if you have access to those people on a daily basis, and you're like, has that helped you, or did you have to learn on your own separate?
So the story with how I got started in React, like that was way before any of this, which I think kind of like led into the new job a little bit. So I think it was like mostly Christmas break where I was starting to get more interested in React, and it got to the point where I was working on this side project, and like on my lunch breaks at work, I would like go off and work on my side project for like a half hour or something. And so I would, I think I kind of mentioned that, and I did, I'm a big fan of Front-End Masters, and they had a course there on React, which is the very first course I did, and then I did some Egghead stuff. But as far as like working with Jameson, there's also someone I work with, Murphy Randall. They're doing a lot with Elm right now. I've played a little bit with Elm, not writing Elm at work right now. The application that I'm working on is using Koa and React. But we do a lot of pairing at work, so that's helpful. I also have a mentor that I work with outside of all of this, who is a Java developer. He works at Pivotal. So he's also had like a very interesting influence in me because we've kind of been learning like React and Redux together. So it's been interesting for me to like have this developer who has done a lot with like Java and see how he goes about wanting to write a React Redux app, and then the React Redux app, or I'm sorry, we're actually using cursors at work, but the React and cursors that we're using at work. So it's interesting.
That's interesting. It's like a totally different viewpoint, I would imagine, on how you approach that sort of thing.
Yep. So I will say, so as this mentor and I have been learning React and Redux together, it's really interesting because I feel like a lot of the things that he has like, kind of encouraged me to do as we're writing this app, I think that they are very much like React best practices, but React just has like a slightly different way of going about them. My mentor also has been writing some Elm too, so that's really, really interesting. And I can talk to that a little bit if we want, and maybe even talk a little bit about the cursor stuff.
The Elm framework you were saying? Is that?
So not that, but the idea is borrowed from that. So like in the show notes, we were talking about, and as we got started in this, we were talking about, there's React and there's like the React ecosystem. So React itself, not that hard to learn. The React ecosystem, different story. So the React ecosystem, I think it's kind of like converging upon using Redux as a way to back up. Like I feel like most people listening to this probably already know. You have props and state. Props get passed down. State is specific to your component, but Redux is a way to like keep track of that state. So Cursors are another way to manage state. So this is like the way we were talking about. React is just the view portion, so this is a way to like manage state, whereas in Angular you have like this MVC, so you don't have to worry about something like this, unless you're using Redux with Angular. Anyways, cursors, rather than having this Flux architecture, cursors are just like this giant tree structure, and your component, because of the way that the cursors are implemented, your component can drill down directly into like whatever node you need, and you update it. And the idea is that you're using immutable cursors. So it's supposed to be really, really easy. I think the app that I've been working on, they were doing all this like very, very new, and so our cursors are unfortunately immutable, so that kind of defeats the purpose of what we were hoping for. So we are slowly looking at how we can kind of migrate from cursors to Redux, because we also think that Redux is such a good idea. And Redux is something that, like I was saying, is like this little side project I've been working on with my mentor. We've been using that.
No, Redux is great, especially because you can use it. I mean, it works very well with React. I've used it with Angular. I've built a vanilla web component app using Redux, like as the data store. One thing also is that Redux. The other thing you have to be careful with, you were talking about immutable data. Redux is not by itself immutable. You can still get yourself in trouble where you end up passing, you say get state, and then you accidentally change something, and then you've somehow messed a bunch of stuff up. But so we're talking about the ecosystem and all these different parts. So you've already talked about immutable data. You've mentioned Redux. So when you were like, okay, I want to learn React, where did you start?
Yeah, we should get back to kind of what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, it's like go ahead. What was there like one website? Was there an article? Was where did you start so you could start wrapping your head around what was going on?
So I think, or not I think, I know, before I started learning React, I started to get interested in functional programming. I actually probably was more interested in Elm before I was React. So as far as functional programming, I won't say that at the time there was a specific thing that I did. This mentor that I work with, we were just kind of talking about different concepts. We played around with this Elm project that he wrote a little bit. And so I got a better understanding of like these functional concepts, like pure functions, which is literally like it doesn't affect anything outside. You don't have the scope stuff I was talking about earlier with Angular. So React tries to be functional. It's not fully functional, but it tries to be functional. So to answer your question, I started learning these functional concepts. If there is a front-end master's course by Carl Simpson that I think is like a very gentle introduction to functional programming that I've done since that, because it came out like a month ago. And then I also think I haven't started it yet, but there's another course that's more advanced. There's also an article I can find and put in the show notes that I tweeted out a couple months ago on functional concepts in JavaScript that I think is like amazing. So I will put that in the show notes. But once I got excited about these functional concepts, that's when I was like, oh, maybe I do want to learn a little bit of React. So as far as learning React, I did, like I had mentioned, the front-end master's course again there. I sound like a spokesperson for front-end masters, but so I did the front-end master's course for React, and that was really good. And then I just kind of bit the bullet and decided to build a project. So when I started to build this project is when we start like asking all these questions, like, oh my gosh, where do I start? And I probably started in a very embarrassing way, but in hindsight, like, I was kind of talking to Eric at the beginning of the show, like, my mindset in programming in this career is like, I entered this career because it was fun, not because like I had to do this. And so I still like to keep that mindset. So be it. Like, I was having fun when I was building this toy application, and it probably stunk at first, but I'm learning and I'm trying to make it better. So when I started out, just a little hello world, like I copied and pasted some some script tags from the web page or from the Facebook docs, so that I could write my little hello world without JSX. I think in order to do that, you even have to like start a server. So I didn't even use Webpack. I just did what I knew I could do, and I just created a Node server, which I'm saying is probably an embarrassing part because people are like, "Why in the world are you doing that when you could just use Webpack?" But I didn't want to learn Webpack. I wanted to like stay focused on just learning React at that time. So, oh, sorry, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead, finish your thought.
Okay, so I did that, and then I just kind of started like going from there. As I was going though, I saw what you were talking about. Like when you're doing Redux, or you're doing a lot of things in React, like you're not forced into doing something a certain way, but I think it's important to try to follow those best practices. Especially for my brain, by following the best practices and breaking apart these components that I was writing instead of just like shoving everything in one component like you could if you really wanted to, I think it helped the learning process. So I would say, like when you're learning, take your time, like don't rush the process so that you can learn the right way to go. Just do it a little bit at a time.
Awesome.
I love your positivity, I have to say. It's so awesome. Like you're just like, I just love what I do.
That's what I try. You know, like, yeah, I could go on and on about that. Maybe I'll talk about that at some other point.
That's great.
So I did have. So you mentioned JSX, and I was actually very curious about. So JSX, I think to a lot of people, is one of those weird things when you first start looking at React, especially so coming from Angular to learning React, JSX is this weird, really weird thing. And so for anybody that doesn't know, it's like this XML format that you can write into your you can write in your JavaScript that then you compiles into functions. Like they pretty much map to functions.
Yep.
So I was just curious. So when you were coming in new and you saw JSX, I was just curious what your reaction to it was, and then how you went around grasping that concept, and then because if you're going to write a React app, you're going to have to use JSX.
Yep.
So is it something that you still just use because that's kind of what you have to do, or like or is it something that you actually like now and you think is a good idea?
No, I like it. Like I didn't use it at first, but I do like it now. So I think if this is just my opinion, like I said, I'm still in the learning process too, but I feel like if you make your components small enough, it helps that learning process. It's not as weird because you're like a lot of people like to make the analogy of like an Angular directive. But if you make your React components small enough, and you're using JSX, like it really is just like take these props and put them on the screen. Like take this component and put it on the screen. So if you keep your business logic out of there, then I feel like it's not as jarring. But if you do have this component that's got like a ton of business logic and you have JSX in there, then it feels kind of weird.
Yeah, we learned, and Danny and I paired online to build some web components, and we learned pretty quickly that shoving everything into one giant monster of a component was not optimal for sure. Even if you're not going to reuse it, just for testability and making it work seamlessly, you have to really compose these things together.
Yeah, and I will say, so to that point too, I think that part was more jarring than the JSX part. I know, like when I sat down to kind of like first do this little toy application, I was just kind of, I don't know, just like a little bit of like that deer in headlights for a minute. Like I had done so much with Angular that I just like wanted to reach for like my controller, and I was just like, it just doesn't, it feels really weird. But I got over that really quickly. I would say like a week or so, and it started to feel good, started to feel normal. So.
Yeah, and it makes it easier to update pieces of your app too, because then just smaller pieces you can do one piece at a time.
Yeah.
Now, Dan Abramov, who was on Read the Source for a couple episodes, he wrote an article recently. It's not so recent, but it was about React and classes, ES6 classes, right? And the React community has been really big with using more modern JavaScript. But there's been like this argument back and forth. When should you use classes? Because you have to do new objects, right? Versus like functional programming. And he had some opinions. I'll post that in the show notes on that. But like, what has been your experience working? Now I know you're fairly new to it, but what have you seen so far with how the classes in ES6 and even imports the modules for ES6 are working out?
So yeah, like entering the React ecosystem, I was doing like some ES6 before, but yeah, they've just like fully embraced it, which is really, really good for learning. On top of like a lot of those functional programming concepts, that is another plus to React. I think it's maybe slightly more difficult to learn, but we can get into that later, just because of the ecosystem. But you do get the benefit of like learning some new things that are kind of universal, like they can transition even on the back end. As far as using ES6 classes, so if you need to like use your like these lifecycle methods in React, is when I would reach for those. Again, like disclaimer, I'm very new to this, so you might want to fact check what I'm saying here. But
no, just your experience. I'm not saying like you have to be the end all be all. This is how you do this in React, but like because I think that there's no real answer, right? Because there's so many different ways you can use React, especially if you're just using React the library or versus the ecosystem pieces.
Always your best bet, if you can, is to write what they call like a stateless component, a pure component, where so you wouldn't even want to do these like ES6 classes. You would just make it a function that takes in props and displays the data. But somewhere higher up, whether you're using like Redux or what they call a container component, like somewhere something needs to be responsible for passing that stuff in. So, but it's like to answer your question specifically, I will say like reach for like just these regular old functions, pure functions, whenever possible.
Very cool. One of the things I noticed about React and web components when we had Andrew Rhoda and Dennis Radin on, and they use React a lot, but they also use web components, and they do both of them together in some cases. And so I think Dennis created this library called Reactive Components, which is like web components that are built with React. And it was interesting because most of the concepts translated very well with the component models. One of the things that was a little different was embracing DOM API changes like in events. So React typically uses synthetic events, and so interop with those things can be a little difficult. But most developers don't care, right? Because you're using an abstracted, HTML interface. But if you're working with components and you can't use properties or attributes for certain types of things, but you're depending on timing of, this event fired, that's kind of difficult. Have you found that with like React, not with web components, but interfacing with the DOM APIs and React?
I haven't had any issues. I will say, there was one case recently where I had to do something a little strange. Now I'm trying to even think back to the specific case, but basically we wanted to like delay something from happening, and as I was like trying to fix this bug, I was like wanting to even reach back for like when I did a little bit of jQuery. I was like, oh man, like I could solve this so easily if I knew how to do that. And I'm not even sure if like I'm totally pleased with the solution that we had to do, but it solved the issue at the time. So that's the only like weird case I've had to deal with as far as that goes.
It seems like for most things it's not a big issue. Just mostly like the custom events basically, right? Because I think React simulates the standard events through their synthetic event emitter. So it's pretty interesting though to hear how people are working with that. Like I know Angular has a binding for events, so it sort of embraces it in a different way.
Pregnant pause. Hooray.
Waiting.
Just in deep thought, that's all.
No, it's true. No, I blame Eric. He posted he posted an article in the side, and I was reading through it, so that is just totally my fault. Eric totally sidetracked me.
I'm not watching our show notes either, so I'm up to you guys for questions.
Yeah.
No, that's cool.
Yeah.
Do you think it's more difficult for junior developers to do React than other frameworks, or do you think it's a little easier?
I do think it's more difficult.
Is that because of the ecosystem or because of the framework itself?
That's a tough question. I think it is more difficult to get started. I think, everybody talks about, like, with Angular 1, that learning curve, like, kind of skyrocketing. But I think the pace is a little bit more steady. As far as being more difficult, yes, definitely the ecosystem. So when I learned Angular, I did a little bit of Ruby on Rails when I first got started. Part of the boot camp I went to, we did 3 months of Node and 3 months of 3 months of Ruby on Rails, 3 months of JavaScript. And so when I learned when I learned Angular, I kind of took the same approach as when I learned Ruby on Rails because it's it's a little bit of an opinionated, not totally opinionated like Ember, but it's slightly opinionated. But as a newer developer with so many new things going on, I think it's good to kind of have like the fact that it's opinionated gives you like a little bit of these blinders that prevents you from like easily getting distracted. But the part that kind of got me really excited why I wanted to start digging into more of React is, like with Angular, and I'm totally talking about Angular 1 because I haven't, done very much with Angular 2, but Angular 1, you have like ng repeat. So, but in React, you're just like mapping over stuff. So that part is easier at the beginning when you're learning Angular because you just like grab this directive and and it pretty much does what you need. But when you're learning React, you need to understand a little bit more about JavaScript. But in the end, that's probably easier as you get better because as you get better, the stuff kind of comes naturally to you. And you don't have to like go double check documentation, or if you run into problems, you have like maybe some weird gotchas.
Yeah, it's like this declarative interface, right, with Polymer and Angular, where it's like you see ng repeat or template repeat or whatever it is, right? It's DOM, so it's like HTML, so it's easier to understand than going through and teaching somebody how to use JavaScript effectively. So yeah. I guess maybe I'm interpreting it incorrectly, but like Java, like working with React the way that React is doing it imperatively, you're actually doing yourself a favor later on because it's much more efficient in how it's doing this, but you're not seeing it right away.
Yep. There are also these things, in learning kind of the React ecosystem and learning more of like these functional programming concepts. So you have a lot of cases where, like with props, like maybe you want to pass in a function that already has some arguments applied to it. So you're starting to learn like some, slightly more advanced JavaScript concepts, but like the use case for them, especially as a newer developer, like I think the first time I saw like partial application or something, I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on? Like a function returning a function. Oh, like why did they do this? Like these horrible people. Why did they write this code? But now that I have had a little bit more experience with this, and like there's a lot of like perfect use cases for doing this in React. it makes like these concepts really, really stick, and it makes them easier to learn having a good use case for them.
You talked a little bit about the ecosystem before, and JavaScript Jabber, I think it was, you guys did an episode with Contra on Shasta.
Yep.
Which is like an effort to get the full React stack sort of mapped out as to this is the canonical way that we deal with this, and that has changed since then even. So it's interesting to see how quickly this is evolving, and what have you guys been doing to keep up with this as far as dev tools and testing and things like that?
So I have not been playing around with Shasta at all. I read a little bit about it for that episode, but as far as keeping up, so again, we talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the show, and especially for I don't know, I love to give advice to other people learning because I am right there with you.
Can't stop learning. Can't stop.
Yeah, you have to keep learning, but at the same token, or on the same token, I don't know, this is something I'm just been bugging me lately as I talk to a lot of friends and stuff. Learn for the right reasons. Don't learn something because you feel like you have to, because you're going to get stressed out and you're going to get burned out and you're not going to want to do it anymore. So learn because you're excited about it, or learn because you think it's going to solve a problem. Part of being a developer is you need to keep up, and you need to do a little bit, but just try to, way easier said than done, but try to strike a healthy balance. But to answer your question specifically, so some of the newer stuff that I've been playing around with, I wouldn't call Redux new anymore, but I did spend some time learning that a little bit. And one thing I know we talked about a little bit when we were talking about coming on is I'm super excited about this testing library that they have now for React called Enzyme. I love testing. It's something that I really, really, really loved about the Angular ecosystem was how easy it was to test things. And it's something that when I first got into a React code base, is a little bit jarring. These pure components are super easy to test, but if you don't have those, it can be a lot more difficult. And so with Enzyme, the reason I like this is you have this concept with these enzyme tests. I'm sure it's just with regular React utilities for testing. You can do shallow rendering for your testing, which means that if you have a component that takes in another component and it's merging the two, then with shallow rendering, you are only rendering one level deep. You're not rendering the whole entire tree of components. You can also do that with Enzyme, but you don't have to, and you're encouraged to only do shallow rendering. So this is something new I'm playing with, but also going back to learning, I think stepping back and making sure you're testing as you're learning is a great way to solidify everything. But back into the enzyme stuff, it's this weird thing because when I did it, again coming from this Angular world, I was like, this is strange. Doesn't feel like unit testing, but it doesn't feel like integration testing. You pretty much call this shallow method, and it gives you back a wrapper, and then you can assert different things on this wrapper. You can get an instance of it, and you can call methods on that wrapper if you want to test those methods directly, or you can just render it, and then really all you have to play with is state and props. So as far as manipulating that component into the different scenarios that you want to manipulate it into, you only have those inputs. So it's up to you to set all those up. So the smaller your component, the easier it's going to be to test it.
Which is a very functional approach.
What's that?
I said that's also a pretty functional approach to things as well. So when you have these small functions with, if you think your props are your inputs and then the component at the end is your output, that's kind of how that works.
Yep.
I always really so that's actually exactly what I was going to ask about with testing, because especially coming from that Angular background where they have a lot of stuff set up to help you test pretty easily. So I've never heard of Enzyme, so we'll have to look into that. I'm currently I just started a new job. This is day 5. Um,
I feel
but
you.
I'm doing a research spike now. We're comparing some front end frameworks to decide what we want to go with. So I'm almost done with my Angular 2 part, and React for me is next. So Enzyme I will actually have to look up because I have to try that, because how easy something is to test is one of the things that we're trying to judge. So I wanted to go back just a little bit to when you first started with React, and was there one specific, and this is just advice for me, because I'm about to go look at a bunch of this stuff, but was there one not necessarily challenge, but was there one React specific thing that caused you the most problems, like one thing that took you a long time to grasp, that you could provide some advice to help people avoid that specific hurdle?
I think one of the big or it's not a gotcha. It just takes a little bit of time to sink in. Is the whole like props versus state thing. Like you can understand that state is like what belongs to this component, and props are things that get passed in. But I don't know, at least for me to like kind of actually have that sink in, like I just had to see it a little bit in the code. So wasn't like a big gotcha. I feel like there aren't a ton of big gotchas. I don't know.
No, I think state and prop works fine, because on the just on their face they're just arbitrary names of something.
Redux feels a little tricky to get used to, especially like the very first time you implement it. You like bang your head a couple times, but once you get it, it seems very, very clear.
Now the React components, like in the visual, I guess I should say visual, but the view layer, right? Are they similar where they have encapsulation via ifs or anything like that, or like how does that play into testing?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question.
So like I'm trying to compare it to other components things, like in web components we have Shadow DOM, which is a DOM API that creates an encapsulation layer. So this has been something that we've used in the DOM without realizing it, but now developers have access to it, right? And so testing something like that, it requires a little more forethought, versus like if you had a component like a jQuery component, you could probably drill into it like from the global scope, whereas you couldn't do that with Shadow DOM. So I'm wondering, is there like encapsulations through closures or anything like that where it makes it difficult to test, and some of these tools help that?
So if I understand I feel like I better understand your question now. I'm trying to think about that, like React specifically. I feel like if you build your components in the recommended approach, that won't be a problem, because the things that are responsible for controlling things, like if you have a container component, like you just want to be cautious that you're not like having this like container component that's like 30 components higher or something, and it's like that path down is really difficult or something, because then it can feel hard to test. Like if you have like this one component that's doing an AJAX call, and then one like couple layers deep that's doing another one that's doing another one. Like I've had a couple of scenarios where like trying to like mock up those AJAX calls and like having to kind of follow this path, but that's kind of kind of where we like veered away from best practices because we were like brand new to React and not totally following what the greatest way to do it would be. Because if you're following the greatest way, like the testing should be pretty easy, it seems like.
Awesome. That fills me with hope and love for React. And like, is there good dev tools like we have for, for like in Chrome browser or even Firefox or anything like that? Is there?
Yeah,
or God
I
help
love.
F12 or whatever it is for IE
I
or
love.
Edge rather.
There are some great React dev tools. Like the best part about those, so like when you're getting, for me, like getting started on this new code base, learning React, like I'm used to in Angular, I can go like inspect the element and, maybe I have some classes that are created dynamically, but not always. So I can like find that class and figure out like where it marries up with a view. But with React, it's a little bit more difficult. But like the React dev tools are great because you can click on a place in your page and open up those React dev tools and it'll tell you what component you're in. And it'll give you the tree so you can figure out where you are within your tree of your components.
That sounds awesome. I want that.
Yeah, dev tools are really good. The ones for React are supposed to be pretty great. So you talked about Webpack a little bit. So we're kind of touching just on different parts of the environment and how you had to go about learning them. So like you said, like you had to learn Redux and you had to learn the basic React stuff. Webpack is you don't have to use Webpack with React, but that's pretty much the standard. That's pretty much the community standard for what people use with it. And anybody that's ever had to use a module bundler of any kind will tell you they are not simple. So so a couple questions. Was this your first time having to work with a module bundler like Webpack? And just if so, how did you go about, again, just trying to wrap your head around what was happening here?
So I'll be honest, I have not dug too deeply into Webpack yet. So as far as what I did, as far as like using it on my little toy application, like we are using it at work, but obviously in work, like, there's a big application. It's doing a lot of things. It's not something like, because I do full stack JavaScript. So in addition to learning React, I'm like learning Koa and learning new databases and all this stuff. But as far as Webpack, like my advice to other people is like find the most minimal working one you can find. That's what I did, and then I just understood that small portion of what it was doing, and that was it. I have not dug very deep into that, so it's like peeling off an onion, and I just haven't gotten into that yet. It didn't seem like super high on the priority list.
It's yeah, that's totally fine. All module bundlers are always really crazy, and I completely agree with you. Because especially one of the most frustrating things when you are trying to set up a project, because like you'll go to a seed project or something like that, and then it just pulls in more stuff than you need, and you're like, this is actually just overwhelming at this point, and I don't want this. But then you're like, okay, I'll just go try to set it up myself, and then you just get like really deep in the weeds. And it's like this with all of them. It's like this with System.js, which is something that I'm trying to figure out now. It's like that with Webpack. But I do like that advice of just, do you know of any minimum working examples that are out there that you would recommend? Like, do you know where you got yours?
I could put this one in the show notes. I just grabbed it because it was a friend of mine's, but Dave Smith that I do the podcast with, he tweeted out one, and I grabbed his, and it has worked great for me.
Perfect. Yeah, some of that's anything to make getting started easier. Because I know also setting up unit testing can be a little bit of a challenge as well. When you're dealing with anything that you have to compile for web stuff, it gets kind of tricky when you're unit testing, especially if you're using something like Karma.
Yeah, I think with Angular, because I worked with Danny for a while too, and he built out this. We already had an established way of testing over Deloitte, and it was interesting because he took the style guide that John Papa did, and he created a generator, which is still open source if anyone wants to contribute to it. And that was really helpful to quickly scaffold up something that's like, this is the canonical way we should be doing this. So once you learn that sort of thing, it's almost self-documenting in that way.
Yeah. That's not to say just say, oh, don't care, just go grab someone else's. Like, I fully intend to go back and understand this. It's just not something high on my list at this point.
It's still learning stages though, right? And then that's hard to say because then you got to change 2 or 3 things at once.
Yep.
Well, and that is one of the things too. So when you are starting out and you want to learn, because again, so like that generator, like I've used it, I think it's good, I like it, but at the same time, I know there's more stuff in there that if you are just learning and you pull that down and you look at it, you're like, what is all of this crap? And there's a bunch of stuff in there that you don't need, and all seed projects and generators seem to be like that.
Yeah.
Which is why I think doing something like you just suggested, where you just grab, you're like, okay, this Webpack thing works. I can just set things up roughly this way, and it'll just work. Right now, I don't care how it works. I just want to write my components, and then I want them to show up on the page.
Yep, like right now, I just want to learn React, and once I felt pretty good about that, I just want to learn Redux. Once I felt pretty good about that, then I went on to the back end. But you could say, okay, I want to go learn how Webpack works.
So would you say an important thing to learning, not just React, but anything, is to not overwhelm yourself with all of the stuff coming in?
So this, like I was saying a little bit ago too, but this is just something like weighing on me lately. I have talked to so many people who look all great and happy and exciting, and you're all envious of them, even myself included a little bit. But then you get to know them, and they're burned out. So, like, I don't know what it is, but we should stop hiding that and stop trying to act like we're superstars. You know, from my skating days, this, like, quest in programming to just, like, do more. I had a conversation with my husband about this the other day. It feels a little bit in skating, like we had all these skaters. I had friends who, this is a very extreme case, but they landed themselves in the hospital with eating disorders because they're just like, I need to be thinner, I need to go faster, you know, I need to win, I need to look better, and it's just like, it's never ending. So I also have a great manager at work who also shares this viewpoint of mine. So that's why I just keep like harping, like if you want to learn it because it solves a problem or you are excited about it, and I think part of your responsibility as a developer is you do need to do some stuff on your own. That's part of what being a programmer is, but just be careful that you like don't cross the line where like you feel like you have to learn it because you have to be this like rock star and know everything, because that's just unattainable, and in the long run probably not going to be as valuable because you're going to be tired.
Yeah, you will burnout is a real thing, and if like you said, you got into this because it's fun. I think that's why a lot of us do it. Is it's something we actively enjoy, and if you do burn yourself out on it, it's not fun anymore, and then it's just a job, and then maybe you just don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, so maybe I can help some people. I fully intend to talk about this more because I think it's important.
Yeah, we're pushing up against time. I know you have a hard stop.
Yeah.
But you know, we appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
We should definitely do an episode on burnout. I think I felt this for the first time recently, like the end of last year. So it's kind of crazy. So we'll talk about that another time.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good episode.
If people want to learn about more about the stuff that you guys are doing, you know, you and Jameson and the whole team over there, where can people go? What's your Twitter handle and all that good stuff?
I am at Amy_Knight with a K. The company I work for is called Koali. We have a couple of things if you look on GitHub. That cursor library that I was talking about, that's up there. But yeah, we're kind of moving away from it. So you can also listen to the podcast I'm on with Jameson called JS Jabber if you haven't heard of it. That's really it. I'll put some of the stuff I've talked about in the show notes.
Cool. Danny, would you like to take us out?
I sure would. I'm paying more attention.
Put you on the spot there.
Paying more attention this week than I was last week. Well, again, so Amy, like Eric said, thank you very, very much for being on. Eric, it is always a blast to talk to you. Again, this has been episode 86 of the Web Platform Podcast, Learning React, and we will talk to everybody next week.
Bye.
Yeah.
You gonna?
I'm gonna say we're out of here.
Yeah, I gotta